So just hello to everyone who's joining today. Welcome to another Totara.Community webinar. We are recording today's session and it will be available in the Totara community after the webinar. If you're watching this recording on YouTube, perhaps you found it there, you can come and join the Totara community for free and you can continue the conversations that we'll be having in today's webinar. So today we're joined by Dave Millner, consulting partner at HR Curator, and Totara's Chief Learning Officer, Lars Hyland. And today we're going to be exploring why the use of data and analytics is vital both to demonstrate the value of your learning solution and give your L&D team a credible strategic voice. And I'm holding Dave's book here, which an introduction to people analytics. So I'm sure Dave will talk a little bit more about that in the webinar. But yeah, so thanks very much, Dave, for agreeing to speak today, and over to you.
Okay, pleasure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. So good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. It seems we have people from all over the place, so welcome. Yes, I'm going to talk about how important I think the impact of data can be upon the HR function and in particular, obviously, the learning and development function. The agenda is really for me just to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I see facing the L&D function. I'll then talk a little bit about creating commercial data insights and the journey that organizations seem to be on. And then I'll share probably about 6 or 7 case studies, which hopefully will bring to life the role of data and the role of analysis, and then some conclusions at the end. Should take about 25 minutes. Do ask questions in the chat because I'm very happy to be interrupted by the Totara team to just sort of go off piste and talk as you know, for things that you'd like to comment on. I was really chuffed that Totara asked me because the learning and development function for me has always been a little bit of a second-class citizen. Part of that is because the perception that there is of the HR function is totality, but I think also a little bit around the fact that, you know, training is not supposed to be, you know, one of the sexier parts of the talent practices that we provide. But I think with what we've all been through over coming up for must be nearly 2 years now, I think the learning function has now got an amazing opportunity. And I'm not saying that data and analytics are the solution to, you know, your problem. By no means they're not. But I do believe it is a part of the equation of trying to reposition and show what the learning and development team can do. So with that sort of adage, I'm sort of just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I see. And I try to keep things in a relatively simple way. I use the analogy of the 3 Ds, data, design, and digital. Those for me, from the research that I did, not just for the book that I wrote, but at the continuing work that I do, working with customers and clients all over the world, these seem to be the 3 pillars, the 3 themes that are a challenge to any part of the HR function, and you know, the L&D team is no exception to that. The data, with a learning twist on it, I think it's about a data-driven learning culture, and I'll talk a little bit about having a commercial mindset. I think it's so important that the commercial mindset is a part and parcel of every L&D practitioner, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Yes, data, metrics, and analytics capability is important. I do not want you to be a statistical genius, okay? That is not where I'm coming from. But what I do believe is that every L&D practitioner should have more of a data-driven approach to the way in which they scope out projects, the way in which they design them, and the way in which they are assessed in terms of their credibility afterwards. I think that's where it leads into the L&D impact and value. How do we demonstrate that? ROI is not good enough anymore, and that doesn't mean that it hasn't got a part to play, by no means, but business leaders want business speak, and I'll share some examples that reinforce that. And I think one of the things I want to say is that this is not an overnight success story, analytics, okay? This is an education and change process. You need to educate people around what it can do and what it can't do. And I'll try and dispel some of the myths that you may have around the role of data during the session. I think the design for me is not just about designing learning interventions, but I think it's about thinking with a future orientation. So if you've done learning analysis, have we thought about tomorrow's issues as much as today's issues that we are considering? I believe from a lot of feedback I'm getting is that, you know, the whole HR function community, the role of organizational design and having much more sophisticated planning processes are going to be very important. And learning and development have a critical part in that, in terms of trying to make sure that we're able to cover the skills gaps that people keep talking about, particularly with regard to tomorrow, but also in terms of looking at the way in which the organization is shaped and mapped out. We'll continue to have transformation programs, automation, productivity-based challenges. They will continue. But I think from a learning perspective in particular, a future focus is so important. You know, we've got to be looking at what are the leaders requiring to be a leader in 2024, 2025? We've got to be thinking about tomorrow's challenges as much as today's. You know, I'm always very interested when organizations talk about their succession planning and the role that learning has a part to play in it, and that's fantastic. And I always then say, so, you know, when was your competency framework developed? And they say, oh, well, we developed it about 3 years ago. So I said, so obviously you're updating it on an annual basis. Well, no. And I'm then sort of saying, so by the time your leaders have got to where they're ready for, from a development point of view, let's say in 2023, 2024, they've developed themselves for the behaviours that were fit for purpose 3 or 4 years ago. So we have got to think in a more future-based way. We have got to incorporate that into our research and the way that we go about scoping out learning requirements. And obviously the personalised learning is a huge thing that people are talking about, driven, of course, by the digital in terms of platforms, new learning technologies and apps. So those for me are, if you like, the tapestry within which the L&D is having to work through. And for me, I think these things are underpinned by three things. One, a one HR approach. I get a bit bored hearing about silos working within the HR community. It's not good enough, it's not appropriate, and we're really not helping each other. I believe that when functions start to work together, and hopefully my case studies will show you some of that, it's amazing what that collaboration, my second theme, actually comes forward and does. Collaboration isn't just about within the HR function, it's about understanding where you can get information, where you can get insights, where you can get data. I'm going to create a bit of heresy and say, maybe you should go and talk to your finance people and find out what data they have available, how it might be useful in some of your research, how it might help you shape the learning solutions that you're asked to come up with in whatever format. Now, again, I don't want you to become a finance person. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But what I do want is I do need you to make sure that you understand where data is available. And I'll talk briefly about that again. And I think the final point is this business focus. We have to be focusing on what are the challenges that the business is facing that we are being asked to try and provide a solution for. That for me is really important. Let's talk about the D on data, because obviously that's what I'm here to focus on primarily. I sense that from the work that I've got involved with, I run rather a lot of workshops during a year to both HR, L&D, talent acquisition specialists to try and help them to become a bit more data orientated. The commercial mindset, okay, for me, it is based around four things, okay? These four things here. Understanding how your organization makes money, understanding the numbers, and understanding what impact that has on us. So, you know, when I'm looking at the financial numbers, I'm with an L&D perspective, I'm starting to say, so which are the roles, which are the job families that have the greatest impact on the way in which we are making money or the way in which we may be losing money? So we need to make sure that that helps us to understand the prioritization. We need to have an external view. We need to understand what's going on. Do you know what your competitors' L&D strategies are within your sectors? Do you understand what's working well, what isn't working well? But you also, particularly with a learning angle, need to understand, the processes that work around us, the performance management, the talent acquisition, the onboarding, etc. L&D is a critical part, and we need to know where it fits, and we need to understand how those are aligned, not just within our own organization, but how do other organizations do that? Obviously, you'll have this strategic organizational insight, in terms of understanding the business, the boundaries, the things that, how it works. But we also need to be organizationally savvy. We need to know how to get things done. Really important. So I can't re-emphasize enough the importance of a commercial mindset. You can see the things I'm talking about from a data, metrics, and analytics point of view. Data is important, metrics are important. Having a technology system that is, this is a phrase that's used quite a lot, one source of truth. You need to have access to a platform that enables you to start to understand where the people, business, and organizational data is. I'll talk a little bit, obviously, about impact and value, but I just want to reiterate, there are things that you can do as an L&D practitioner that are about mathematics, about trends, about patterns. They are not about data science and regression. You can leave those to the experts within your analytics teams to do that. But we still need to make sure that we're thinking along those lines. And as I said, this is a change program after all. I thought I'd just give, it's all easy for me to say be data driven. Here are just, some tips, I guess. The first thing for me was, I always, wherever I go in the world, whatever problem I'm asked to, I'm always starting with what's the business or the organizational problem we're trying to solve. It's not about what the training need is, it's about what is the impact that need is having on the business. Because if you can get them to understand, to say that the solution you're developing is trying to solve this business problem, I would suggest you might start to get a little bit more favorable response to what you're doing. We need to understand what the evidence and the data says. Sometimes there is no data, but we still need to be very critical in our evidence portrayal. If we're doing a needs analysis, we need to be really focused on the impact on performance. We need to know what capabilities need to be improved or changed. And we also need to know what practices also need to change. It may be that we're coming up with a new personalized learning solution or whatever, but it may well be that what you've found is that there also needs to be some feedback to the talent acquisition team, maybe to the performance management team, that we need to think in a more holistic way. This is not just about solving a business problem that L&D have been asked to solve. It's about a business problem that the whole people function is trying to resolve. I think a data mindset is a really important element, and there is no way within 20-25 minutes I could cover or give that enough credibility. There are 4 themes that I think emerge: a business or a commercial focus, developing the consulting skills to be able to develop and understand the criticality of something. And I think that's really about prioritization. How do we prioritize what is important and what is essential? We have got to start to think in those ways. There's an infrastructure that we need to think about, because we need to consider ethical use of data. We need to think about the impact that employees will have if they hear we're using data. So all of these things are really important. But we do need to remember that anything we come up with, it's a change process, it's a change program. So we need to be making sure that whoever is responsible for taking that forward, whether it's yourselves or maybe in partnership with HR business partners, this is a change process, and we really need to make sure that we focus on that. And then we need to understand where your data is. I wanted just to give you an example. For me, when I'm looking at an employee, I'm looking at it through the eyes of time is money. Okay, an organization, an employee does not just cost an organization's salary. There are organizational taxes, there are the cost of benefits, there are the training costs, there's the office space that you possibly may be using in in the new world or the hybrid world or whatever world that we find ourselves up to, and obviously mobile and laptop. And this is just to give you an example, a piece of work I did just a couple of weeks ago. There was a role I was asked to look at. The employee salary was about 50,000 euros, but in actual fact, by the time we thought about all of these associated costs, actually the cost to the organization is about 70,000 euros. So what I'm saying is we need to think very much from the very start, from the get-go, around the cost of what we're trying to do. There are three sources of data. There's the people data. Those are just some of the areas you may have access to. There is business data, and again, those are just a few examples. And then there is external data that, again, you may have access to, you may be interested in looking at. That is your data warehouse. So you need to be looking at that and starting to say, do I know where I can get access to engagement data to see if there's been an impact on engagement of our learning programs? Do I know where performance management data is housed so that I can start to see what role L&D's had in improving performance or maybe considering work in the future? We need to have a plan for all of these types of things. And I guess this is not about being reactive as a function, it's about being proactive. And I know you're probably going to ask the question, but we don't have time, we're not resourced to do it, whatever. But what we have got to do is we've got to be much more smart in our prioritization. And that's why I go all the way back to the commercial mindset of understanding, if you're going to do a program, make sure that the program is on a role or a job family that is having a major impact upon the organization and the business in which you work. That's enough about data. I wanted to talk a little bit about the journey, okay, because there is a journey and a process that people go through. As you can see, at the heart of it is a commercial mindset. That is the key to it. And from the research that I've got involved with, there are probably four elements to the journey, and not every organization will go through this sequentially. It's there as a frame. And the first one for me at level one is around a reporting, fairly opportunistic approach to data. Nothing wrong with that. So that you will have one-off reporting. Time is money, which I'll show an example in a minute. You'll probably have data all over the place. It may be quite ad hoc. It might be quite difficult to get hold of. But despite that, there is still a desire to be data orientated and to drive that forward. Now, at the next stage is when probably technology comes into play. And what that's enabling you to do is starting to look at hopefully an HRS system or maybe an integrated one. It could be that you've got 3 or 4 systems. So do you have a way of enabling all of these systems to talk into one area? There are providers who will do that. You may have dashboards, you may have a business intelligence team, you may have data functions, you may have specialist metrics. It may be that you're developing a dictionary about what data is available and how you would describe that. We would then go to the big step, is then making the step from level 2 to 3. This is where we're starting to analyze information, and we're looking for understanding things which are not what I call very obvious. Okay, and so it's looking at things that may be not obvious to the normal eye. It may be that you need, somebody with a little bit more statistical expertise to go digging, or it may be that you're able to do it with some mathematics. And again, I'll show you some examples where you can do that. And then the final part is where you probably are starting to look at the future, and you're starting to come up with what we call predictive analytics or prescriptive modeling, which is starting to shape and say, based on what has happened in the past, this is what we believe we're able to do, but we will need to make the following changes, which could be job design, job focus, organizational shape, whatever it may be. It may be that there's a central team that the L&D people can draw on, and you shouldn't be afraid of them. You should be asking them to learn and help you to appreciate what they're doing. One of the critical things for me is that the whole HR function, when it's operating at that level, is acting as a profit or a value add center. They are not a cost center. They, from their analysis, are indicating that we are a growth and profit center. And I will show you an example right at the very end of how that has emerged. So that's the journey. And I wanted to just sort of share that this is something that is a part of the book, but there is something that you can download. It's a piece of work that's been done by somebody I've worked with for a number of years, in a business called peopleinsight.com. They've done something called the data-driven HR business partner, and it's based on those 4 premises that I talked about: business and commercial focus, consulting, infrastructure, sustainable change. If you wanted to download those tools, not all of them are relevant to the learning team, but I think they may be helpful. They may be useful in helping you to try and take that forward. So Lars has very helpfully put that in the chat. So please do download it. You just register and you can download it. And it will give you a lot of information and a lot of different ideas about how you might want to start to think about becoming a little bit more data-driven. Now, what I thought I would do is I would just sort of show some examples of level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then that'll then take us to the time when you can ask me some questions and we can have a conversation, whatever. This is level 1, okay? So these are probably some core metrics, and I'm sure they're the sorts of things that you're probably aware of. How much is the company spending on L&D activity? What's the cost to revenue as a percentage? How many hours are employees learning, etc.? What's your development quality like? So all of those things are core HR metrics, really important. They're helping us to understand the efficiency and effectiveness of the function. There is also this time is money, and this is a true story. This is a sales guy who I used to work with in IBM a couple of years ago. I was just catching up with him, and he was so chuffed that he got a brand new training course for his new sales team, 15 people, and he said, it's only cost me $30,000, it's a snip. And I said, well, it's going to cost you a bit more than that. And he said, I don't understand. And I said, well, you've got their salary, they work so many days, so you've got that basic cost on top of all these other things. And so the figure I came up with was that. And I said, obviously, they're not going to be selling for one of those days, so you need to take that into account. And that came to that. And so it's not trying to make it look more complicated, but what I'm trying to say is that the ROI he needs to get back from that workshop is not against a cost of $30,000. It's against a cost of nearly $140,000. So what I'm trying to get across is that even in L&D, we have got to be thinking around how much does something cost. The time is money is quite an important concept, I believe, because it's something that all of us can do. And it's something that we have got. We've got core data, we've got time, and we've got the salary of everybody. Nobody works for free. So there is no excuse for you to say, I don't have any quality data. You do. There is most definitely some data available. I wanted to share an example at level 2. This was a simple example. I'm not going to go through all the bullet points. I've just highlighted the bits that I'll mention. This is a global bank in the UAE I was working with a couple of years ago. The CEO saw some inconsistent branch unit performance. He was also worried about the digital transformation of bank, less branch units. So he wanted to focus, and he found out that there were 5 very high performing units out of 19 in his region. L&D developed a 2-day mentoring program. And those managers were trained on how they would act in a mentoring capacity. It broadened their insight into how they would help. And they then started to work with the other 14 units and the 14 managers to try and help them to understand what they could do to improve both the engagement of their teams, but more importantly, the performance. So 6 months down the line, these were the sales results that we saw. They improved their sales by 8.9%, which was somewhere in the region of $750,000. So that was more upselling of services, most definitely better people buying new products, new areas, etc. Customer satisfaction in those units had improved by 4.8%. And the cost of a 2-day mentoring program against those benefits that they saw, the ROI was 1,400%. Okay, and that was just a very simple piece of activity, a little piece of simple work. As a result, 4 of those 5 mentor managers have now got promoted into new roles, looking in more complex roles, but mostly focusing on performance and engagement of their people. And the initiative was rolled out. So L&D made a huge input there from an engagement and performance problem. And L&D were invited with some suggestions as to what could be done. That's what they were able to do. And as I say, the demographics are very simple. The data was very simple. This is what the data was for the performance levels at point A. This is what they were at point B. What was the difference? That was a very simple piece of analysis. Here's another piece of analysis. Sometimes we have to build business cases, okay? This is a big organization. Can't say the name, but if I mentioned it, you would know it. The operations function was not particularly good, and the development of managers was poor because they were losing a lot of people. They wanted to build a business case, and they asked HR and L&D to build one. And I was asked to then support them in doing that. So we focused on cost of development, salary of attendees, the value of the behavioral development that they were looking for, and obviously, what was the focus that we were looking at. We came up with an ROI of 191%, and I will show you what that looked like. I'm not going to talk you through it, but the point I really wanted to make is that by building a business case, which the senior line managers were interested in because we'd involved them and it involved money, they were able to make a huge difference. You can see that managers' capability was improved. You can see engagement survey had changed significantly about the perception that was there. Attrition in this population dropped over a 3-year period from 21 to 4 people as a result. And the savings in both finding replacements and also in new training, lost business, etc., they worked it at £1.1 million, and that was quite a conservative figure. So that was well exceeding the ROI. Now, this slide is a bit complicated, and again, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but the point I wanted to show you is that what we had to do is that, costs were quite simple. That's quite easy. But what we had to do is we had to turn, because people were trying to develop competencies and behaviors, we had to work out how we could put a value on behaviors. And this is how we did it. We used line managers and the senior managers who we were trying to persuade to help us to understand how important was behaviors to the role in comparison to technical knowledge. So you can see the method that we went through. Again, you'll get all the slides, so you'll be able to look at them. But the critical thing here is that we were able to, yes, identify the 191% ROI, but what we were able to do was to start to bring the world of L&D and development into a language that the business leaders were looking for, because they were starting to understand the value of what was going to happen to these individuals. So as again, I can talk a little bit more in questions about that. I wanted to give another example, which is sort of at level 2, level 3, which was again driven by a learning and development team about 4 or 5 months ago. There was a 10,000 person organization, and they were losing a lot of people during the very difficult 2021 that all of us have had. They were losing probably somewhere in the region of about 8% of their talent. And it equated to these sorts of numbers. So quite a lot of people. I came up with a very simple model. I said, well, what's their average salary? Okay, very broad brush. How much is it going to cost to replace them? Now, the cost to replace most employees in roles will vary between 1 to 1.5 times their salary. I went for a very cheap 70%, okay, because I didn't want to overstate it. But as you can see, because the turnover of staff was at 8%, they were conceptually losing a lot of money in terms of opportunity costs, replacement costs, people having to work extra overtime to compensate for people being away. Now, the interesting thing is that the L&D team had in their mind that there was 3 things that could be done: career pathways, providing leaders and managers with some new ideas as to how to work better with remote workers, hybrid workers, and to focus on personalized learning. And so what we then said is, well, look, if we were able to just reduce the turnover by 1%, from 8% to 7%, through better L&D practices, which the cost was about 200,000 euros to do those sort of programs that they worked on. And if we could just get 100 less people leaving, we could save 4 million euros, okay, in relationship to that very simple equation. Now, you can then say, oh, you're just making it up, Dave. But what I'm saying is I'm looking at the data which was real. Turnover data was real. The cost to replace, I understated it. Average salary, that's real. And so what we were trying to do was to bring to life for business leaders the fact that L&D had 3 solutions that they were looking to do. There was a cost associated with it, but if we can make an impact that will reduce and retain just 1% more people than we currently are, we can save ourselves a lot of money. And guess what? Those programs were implemented, and in actual fact, turnover is reduced quite significantly, I think by nearly 2.8%. So they've actually saved the business a lot more money. And the fact is they've been talking in dollars or euros or pounds. They've not been talking in ROI in that particular instance. Very quickly, I just want to cover just a couple more examples. This was a traditional utilities organization in the UK, very strong training culture because of regulation and compliance. Customer service was an issue. They did a great learning needs analysis. And they asked me to have a look at it. I said, it's brilliant. I said, I assume you're going to assess the people before you put them on the program. And they said, why are we going to do that? And I said, well, because you need to know where you're starting so that when you demonstrate the value that you've brought through your program, you're able to identify what improvements that you've seen. You can see these were some of the capability improvements, the engagement improvements, productivity, and look, that was the time savings, back to time is money, nearly just under £500,000, and the exceeding of sales targets by just over £250,000. The interesting thing on this example is that the execs have now said, I don't want to hear ROI, I just want to hear about what we are going to do from a business point of view, focused around the strategic metrics that are driving our business. So L&D is now focusing entirely on demonstrating value through those metrics. In other words, the language of the business. My final example is the profit example. It's Experian. Experian, you know, are a credit reporting company. They had a terrible employee attrition problem, costing them a lot of money. They developed a very fancy, very sophisticated data-driven predictive model. They brought an expert in. They found the 20 factors that impacted upon why people left. They implemented this program through a platform that was assessing people. The L&D programs would change to reflect some of those issues, some of those motivations, some of those needs that had come out from their research. And the attrition has now reduced by 4%, which has now saved them somewhere in the region of about $14 million over 2 years. The interesting aside is that the HR community of Experian now sell that service plus some of the solutions that they have to support it to other organizations. So they are now a profit center. They are not a cost center. 2 final things before I open it up. These are just, I guess, some of my thoughts and learnings by working with learning and development teams. I think collaboration is vital, not just collaboration with HR, but collaboration with other, head office functions. They've got data, they've got insights. Please think about data creation. Hopefully I've just shared a couple of examples of things that you could do, but please, data does not have to be perfect. I was brought up when I worked in HR and L&D for a little while that, our data has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be. You might only have 50% of the data you want. Use it. See what it's telling you. But again, I want to reiterate that I do not want you to become a statistical genius. You need to understand where you have got some skills and also where you need access to other skills. It's probably in that jump between level 2 and level 3 that it happens. The development of capability, I think, in being data-driven is so important, because we've got to create a language that enables us to present L&D in a different light, in a different way. And as I said, it's a change program. I guess my final conclusions is that if we stand back, digital's just going to give us nothing than more data. So this is not going to go away. And I do think that we have now, as a function, need to think in monetary terms all the time. We've got to use the language of the business in the way in which we report things. And I really would, this is not about complexity. Use meaningful measures, because I've always found simple and accurate is far better than obscure and complex. It is about developing commercial and numerical capability, and it is about, using and building a framework that is metric-based, maybe KPIs that are data-based, and trying to make sure that we're thinking in a more analytical way. And my final thing would be crawl, walk, run. In other words, this is not going to happen overnight. It takes time. So please, look for your quick wins, look for the things that you think will add value to you and your team, and move forward. So I've gone over a little bit time there. I apologize to the Totara team, but as you can see, that's the book that came out about 18 months ago or so. It's focused on, it's a book for HR and L&D practitioners. It is not a book for data geeks, okay? It's trying to break down some of the myths, some of the misnomers around it, and hopefully giving you a lot of case studies and examples that bring to life and show you that maybe analytics isn't quite as horrific as I thought it would be. So back to the Totara guys. Sorry, I overran a little bit there.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dave. Had lots of people saying that was very interesting language needed to present the L&D case. If anyone does have any questions right now for Dave, please do feel free to ask them. Or Lars, did you have a question that you wanted to ask as well?
Dave, I just want to say thank you very much. That was very stimulating. I think seeing examples like that just makes it much more tangible, doesn't it? And being able to relate that back into your own businesses. So I hope that's appreciated by the audience here. But one of the earlier points you were making about thinking about the tomorrow, and that it really resonated that in too many cases there's a risk of over planning or spending too much time planning and ending up resolving to do something that is no longer relevant. And I was going to make a comment about what tomorrow is in the change that we're experiencing right now seems to tangibly accelerate. So your ability to think more and more increasingly into almost real time is more tangible. And related to that, what you said about competencies, and defining job roles. I'm sort of sensing that the half-life of a job role has shrunk considerably, so I wonder what your thoughts were on how you cope with that and how you leverage analytics to support you.
It's an interesting observation. I think one of the key things, I was talking to a number of organizations yesterday, the likes of Microsoft, Facebook, and a few others, through a university in America I'm associated with. And they were talking about how do we think differently about the future? How do we consider it? What is it we need to do? And it's quite simple, really, because what it's trying to do is it's trying to use the skills, particularly that L&D have got, because L&D have always done research, in terms of training, learning needs analysis and whatever. It's just that we need to do more and more of that to really understand, well, if that's what it's like today, what does it look like tomorrow? Because one of the interesting things that I've seen is a bit of a global phenomenon, even in those big companies I mentioned, is that leaders find it very difficult to agree with what does a successful X or Y person look like. Somebody says it's knowledge, somebody says it's attitude, somebody says it's behavior. And I think that within L&D, we've got that research capability that we've all been trained to do. And I think we should be using that in a much clearer way to just say, okay, I know you want X, but actually, why don't we do something that's going to cover not just something for 2021, but actually maybe fit for purpose for 2022. And I think we need to think in different ways about different models, different ideas, different things that will help us to understand what it is that we need to do. Workforce planning is a really important, becoming more and more important in organizations. And L&D needs to be a part of that in terms of, how we're looking at critical roles. What value do they bring? How are they going to survive? What's the, where are we start? Where's the baseline of what's available? What supply have we got? What demand? How can we fill the gaps? So all that language and all those things, L&D should be part of that. And they need to be demonstrating, and you can only do that by demonstrating it in terms of the way you're thinking and the way that you're trying to look at how to solve the problem, not just for today, but for tomorrow. So a bit of a rambling answer to your question, I guess, but there is no perfect answer. But no. I think that the techniques that we've always grown up with in L&D training, we should be applying them in a different way, because that's the sort of research that helps to bring together, both quantitative and qualitative information. And, I am not saying that we don't need both streams of those data. We do. We need to just bring them together. And I think L&D has got a phenomenal opportunity to be part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And it goes beyond L&D, I think, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Harking back to your point about silos and,
yes.
and HR functions, being split down into L&D perhaps, and then performance management focuses, and then leadership, and then other elements, is that you end up with quite a lot of noise.
Yes.
So that impacts the effectiveness of
correct
each of those teams.
Elizabeth in the chat has just said this links in with personas that we designed to help us design. Yeah, absolutely right, Elizabeth. That's one of the brilliant things that has come out, over the last 18 months, most certainly, that people are talking personas, and it's not a fictitious made up thing. It's trying to provide some reality about what tomorrow, which is unclear, may look like. So, the personas is a really good way of trying to bring that sort of future focus to life, I think.
No, definitely. Jan made a comment actually about seeing misalignment between HR and business. So it's about measuring performance or marking performance. So you've got managers being perhaps lenient in their measuring of performance of their teams, and their business targets are missed.
Yes.
Or there's just this sheer mismatch between expectation at senior level and what's actually capable, what you're capable of, but based on resources that you have.
And I think it leads into something that all functions all over an organization are not very good, is follow-up, in terms of following up what you've done. So if you've provided a program, are we following up to see these people that have been through the program, which one of these are now high performers, which one are okay, which one's performance hasn't changed? Why is that? If it's a managerial or a leadership course, is there an impact upon engagement? Is there an impact upon productivity? That's why you need to go and talk to finance and see what data is around, what operational information is. So I think we've all got a responsibility to be better at follow-up, to raise the issue of, actually, this has done really well in this area, or if it hasn't worked, why hasn't it? And we've got to be on the front foot to somehow think about these sorts of things, because that's an opportunity. It's a door waiting to be pushed open. The business isn't going to ask you. We need to be pushing it through and saying, we believe that this has become as a result of this. We now need to be focusing on that. And I think we really need to be far more proactive and thinking in that data evidence sort of way.
Pam's making a good point, which is quite interesting because we were asking before about other webinars we'd like to run, and Pam was saying this topic might be an interesting webinar to cover. How can L&D actually break into the HR silo and be part of that workforce planning conversation? So is there a strategic way to just break into the HR conversation? How would you approach it?
At the end of the day, it's about credibility, visibility, I would suggest, and you have to earn that. And I think, regrettably, a lot of HR functions do have a bit of a silo mentality, and I don't know why it happens. I can't see what value it brings, because when I've seen organizations where the teams have been working almost as one, it's a natural thing. I think it's about proving the value and proving the worth. So if there's little piece of work that you can do that can say, look, we've just done a quick review of X or Y, we've done this, we've seen that, look what it's provided. If we could get more people to go through it, then it could lead to an increase in income of X. You know, there's a very simple question. What's the difference between your high performers and your okay performers? You should be able to find that very simply. What's the difference between your high performing teams and your okay performing teams? You'll have engagement data that's got demographics, you'll have performance data that finance have got. So start thinking about what data is available and find out where is the commonality of data where you can start to put an L&D edge and perspective on it. That's what I would be thinking about, because if you can do that, it shows credibility and it shows that you should be at those types of conversations. You know, because it's not going to happen by just waiting for somebody to say, oh, would you like to come along? You've got to have something to say when you are there. And hence, that's why that commercial mindset is so important.
And sorry, and Dave, it's not always about money though, is it? That's what Pam is asking here as well. She's saying she works for a library and the concern is for customer services, not really on cost. Yep. So it's not always about proving it's worth financially, is it?
No, if the strategy of that particular function is around, you know, a customer intimacy, customer experience, how do you measure that? And therefore, how do you therefore find out that X or Y has been particularly brilliant at customer experience? So there's always ways of doing it. You know, it could be mystery shopper, it could be asking people who've attended the library to provide feedback around it. So there's always ways that you can create and get access to data. It may be perception based, but that's better than having nothing, because otherwise we're just operating in a void.
No, I agree. I wanted to make a comment, which was there's such an opportunity to look more deeply into how people interact at work, and if you have the means by which to do that, like understand what people are sharing, what questions are being asked, you can uncover needs, you know, of training needs, which maybe aren't the ones that managers or leadership are thinking it is. So there could be, for example, lots and lots of confusion and difficulty where people are looking for workarounds around a particular process or system, and the data can point you at the fact that the answers are even already there. It's just they're not where it's not actually in the L&D team at the moment because they're not close to it, but it is in other parts of the business. So being able to proactively go out looking for situations like that, you can be proactive in finding opportunities to make quite tangible differences as a result. So there's the sort of data that you can leverage to identify opportunities for positive change, and that type of activity positions you in the eyes of the leadership as business oriented, doesn't it?
Yes, most definitely. And I think that's why we need to be thinking about the challenges that organizations have. Productivity is a huge one at the moment because they're not sure whether if you work hybrid or remotely as to whether you're going to be as productive as if you're in an office. Well, the data depends what data you look at. Some data says it is, some data says it isn't. So, you know, that we can always collect data and information about things, but we have got to make sure that the employees are at the heart of this. Data is not there to replace our underlying importance that we place on people. You know, the HR and the L&D community are the people's advocates, the employees' advocates in many respects. So data is not trying to take that away from us. It's trying to give us a tool that will enable us to be even more of an employee advocate, because we've actually got evidence that's saying the managers and leaders aren't doing this right. You know, this is what the feeling is of employees at the moment. This is why organizations are seeing the great resignation, because people are rethinking that about them, their work, and their organization. And some people have decided that actually the grass is greener somewhere else. Now, it may be untrue, but it doesn't matter. Their perception is their reality. So, you know, I think the role of data is very important for employees, so that they are understanding, A, what a good job you're doing, look what we've got, and also these are the things that we need to be looking at. And again, that's why the performance dialogue process is so important, because it's there to be very transparent about performance, about data, about information. And we've got to be much more open to employees to see what it is, what we're thinking, what we're measuring, and what we're expecting from them. You know, that starts to make employees feel valued, feel appreciated when they've done something, and also to get told when you need to just improve this. Well, great. At least I now know, instead of learning in 6 months' time, that I haven't been performing very well. This is why the whole performance dialogue process is even more important, you know, in the world that we're now finding ourselves in, because people aren't in the office and not touching each other in the way that they used to. You know, we have to get much better at that. And we need to think about how could we measure these types of activities. It's so important, because if we don't, leaders and managers will find other priorities to deal with, and the implications are that people will just walk, because they're not. I think one of the things I've seen is that employees are getting much more active in their thoughts and in their sharing and in their views about things, and if we aren't ready to respond to that in a positive way, of which L&D is a critical part of the engagement, the experience process, you know, we really do have an opportunity for the L&D teams here to be a part of the solution to some of the retention issues that people are getting quite worried about.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a really great session today. We've had lots of people talking and asking questions and getting involved. And I would say that you can continue this conversation within the Totara community. Obviously, this is a huge issue that is going to, I think we could talk about all night, couldn't we? And we probably won't get to the solutions, but we can definitely start to make a difference. And I thank you, Dave, for sharing us some solutions today that can help employees really make that difference. Do you want to maybe just show your book slide one more time? Because I saw there was a website where you could buy it from with the code for the 20% off. I'm not sure if we have that, but I have the book here. But yeah, we can post a link to that as well in the community after the session. So don't worry, Dave, if you haven't got it now. Lars, is there any final thoughts that you wanted to add before we finish today?
Just to say thank you again, Dave. That's been very, very information packed, I think, and action packed as well. There's actions that we can all take away and back into our own businesses. So I'd love to think that, you know, these messages become much more, you know, mainstream, should we say, you know, people inside learning functions inside their HR functions, you know, start to be, you know, brave enough, I suppose, become much more engaged with the other HR folk around them, and can use this type of language and this type of approach to sort of change their reputation and really shift the dial.
It's a brilliant opportunity. You know, it's not going to be without its challenges, that's for sure. But this is your time, and you know, I think the use of technology in learning is most definitely, it's captured the imagination of business leaders, and it may be a different type of thing that we're thinking of from a solution point of view, but we've got to remember is that the generations of joining the workforce have a different mindset maybe to the older parts of the community, such as me, in terms of how I was brought up work-wise, etc.
Okay, so thank you very much to Dave, and thank you, Lars, for joining today. And yeah, as I say, this recording will be available on the Totara community, maybe today, possibly tomorrow. So thanks everyone for joining. And Dave, we look forward to potentially hearing from you again in the future, because I think this conversation is going to be one that we need to really come back to as well.
Happy to if I can, yes, by all means.
Thanks. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Lars.
And
Thanks,
you.
everyone.